welcome to season 2 of the Worldlands podcast. We are back after a brief summer break, and we're happy to be back because while we were off the air, there's a lot that happened. So today I'm joined by co-host Bruce McIndoe of McIndoe Risk Advisory. Bruce, how are you doing? How was
I'm
your
doing
summer?
great. The summer was great, and back to the March.
Right. I'm sure you traveled a lot.
I did.
Nice. Well, since we took this hiatus, I figured this would be a good time to catch up on some news that happened while we were off air.
Hmm.
A lot happened. So, first and foremost, something that happened recently. I don't have a pager, but do I have to worry about my cell phone exploding on me?
Oh gosh, we're gonna start with that. All right.
Yeah.
Um, how about not exploding, but possibly having a meltdown?
Mm,
Um, so I think most travelers are well aware of that cell phones and laptops have lithium batteries, so they can get hot and they can hit a kind of an inflection point we call kind of the thermal runaway, where they just start heating up and melting and can actually then ignite into a fire, right? So
mm-hmm.
and why you have to testify that you're not putting that in your baggage. They don't, there's actually the history of a downing of an airplane because of batteries. But and then you can carry a small quantity, your laptop, your cell phone in your
Right.
carry on. But so yeah, it can not explode, but melt down on you or catch on fire.
So I'm sure you've heard, the biggest news story recently was how pagers and walkie-talkies were involved in an attack in Lebanon. So
Mhm.
what happened there? Like, how are they using these things, like these devices that we hardly ever use in this attack?
Oh, well, so one is, definitely have heard and actually heavily involved in doing some assessments for clients
Oh,
around its implications, right?
nice.
Um, so it's widely accepted that Israel's version of the CIA, the Mossad, and they call it the Israeli Security Agency, but it's not really like NSA so much, but it's more like an FBI or an MI6 in the UK called the Shin Bet. So they worked through this to what we would call as a supply chain attack, right?
Okay.
And they turned what typically these days a supply chain attack is around software and firmware and
Right.
injecting malware and that kind of stuff. This is what we call a kinetic attack, right? Where you've infiltrated the supply chain, instrumented these devices so that under command and control, you can cause them to explode, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
that creates the kinetic action. So, that's, how this, I guess, came about and became, and like why was this targeted is because in Lebanon and other countries that are Israelis' foes, they're confident to a high degree that their typical mobile communications are intercepted and their devices are tracked, and so they needed to move to other technology
Right.
to get off the mobile net, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they looked at that and said, "Oh, that's interesting." So now they're going to buy pagers and walkie-talkies for their members, and maybe we can turn them into bombs.
Intercept that somehow.
Right?
So, because of, I'm not going to say it was easy, but there's clearly something going on with the supply chain, like you mentioned. Does that make you worry at all that it could happen anywhere else?
So that's my involvement, right? So clients seeing this are going like, "Oh my god," right?
Hmm.
Like
Right.
if I can assure you that after this happened, that Israeli foes that are carrying cell phones and other devices quickly turn them off
Oh, I'm sure.
until
That
they
would be
got
the smart thing to do.
distorted because everyone's paranoid, and then of course that paranoia also is, well, what devices that were in the supply chain got directed elsewhere, right?
Right.
And so so people are like, wow, if I have these ICOM mobile handheld walkie talkies, yikes,
Yeah, zero
so
chance.
it got a lot of people nervous, and of course that's where I step in and try to help assess and understand what that risk might look like. But these supply chain attacks have been around probably for as long as man, right? So think about before technology, if you could intercept food going from farm into the castle, and you could
Right.
inject poison, right, and then
Mm-hmm.
send it on its way toward your adversary. There's a supply chain attack, right? So
Right.
that's really what this is. This is really all about. But the other thing that I have seen, this, again, not classified, that they actually, even if you open the device, it was so well sealed and secured in the actual battery packaging
Mm.
that it was not something that you could just crack it open and see some, plastic explosive sitting in there. And
They did
my
well to hide
understanding,
it.
and so it's fairly, very, very sophisticated. But coming back to this as something to concern about, from the time I've been in the IC and worked with DoD back in the 80s, we've had supply chain security processes. So when the Department of Defense or the intelligence community buys laptops and computers and things like that, they go through a rigorous inspection and validation process.
Right.
So they're ordered, they are delivered to an intermediate station where they actually disassemble them, they scan them visually, and make sure that the components are all what they're expected to be, and they're in the right place, and there isn't some deviation from the
Right.
standard. They validate the firmware, validate or reload the software, package it back up, and then send it in securely into those facilities. So this has been going on for decades, that the US has understood that that is a vulnerable
Right.
angle to get all kinds of malware, as well as listening devices and other things
Yeah.
into secure areas.
So we're gonna take it back a bit
All
to the end of July in Paris. There were the Summer Olympics. Did you watch it at all?
right. I wish I could. So many clients and involved with the security and keeping tabs on a lot of other things, and of course the time difference didn't help. So
Oh, right.
so my watching consisted of highlights and reading news articles when the subway and the train, somebody sabotages the train rails to
Right.
disrupt the Olympics. That was my watching.
Yeah, we definitely watched. Gymnastics and track were
Hmm.
really big in my house. My kids, like, you couldn't tell them that they weren't competing. It was funny. Um, but I wanted to bring it up because the Olympics served as a near universal rallying point for like everyone's eyes on that
Hmm.
city. But with that many eyes on one place, is that like a time for activism, messaging? Because a lot of this year, it wasn't that many athletes from Russia. I bring that.
Hmm.
Um, they didn't have their flag flown. They didn't sing the anthem.
Well,
Why
that's
do
because
you think
the
that is?
IOC didn't let them.
And
Internet,
why
the
is that?
International Olympics Committee, right?
Yeah,
So
why?
all the things that you talked about is why I don't get to watch them. Happen, is because all eyes are on that event, and it's very high profile. It's essentially all the nations in the world are there, and so anyone that
Hmm.
has any grievance, this is a great place to make a stand, or unfortunately create an incident, right?
Right.
So definitely. But yeah, the Russians, like I said, the IOC basically told the Russian Olympic that they were not going to fly the Russian flag, and in fact, if Russian athletes wanted to participate, they had to participate under what they call the individual neutral athletes, right? And it's called
Hmm.
AIN, which is the French flipping of things. But and they had to also be under a neutral flag, right?
Hmm.
So we went, from hundreds in the Tokyo Summer Olympics to, I don't know, a dozen or something that were
Yeah, I think
in.
it was like 10 or 12.
Yep. Hmm.
So, do you think that this is primarily because of the doping scandal that they had well, maybe a decade ago, and with, or do
Hmm.
you think it was punishment for their invasion in Ukraine?
So yeah, I would say it's this like escalation, right? So in it was 2014. A German media outlet did an expose, right, on
Hmm.
Russian doping, and so the Olympic Committee
Yeah.
had to take notice of that and investigate that, and then there's been several other incidents, from that time leading to
Hmm.
now. But I think what we said was, okay, all that happened, and then in the Tokyo Summer Olympics there were 300 plus Russian athletes
Right.
under their flag. What happened? Well, Ukraine happened, right?
Yeah.
And so, yes, absolutely, it is the main impetus to go from annoyance and surveillance of the Russian athletes and testing and all the things that they've been doing. But for this one, it was clearly Ukraine that caused them to say, you can participate, but not under your colors.
Yeah, I saw in one article that I think like one of the requirements was that the person who was competing or trying out for the Olympics could not have been a part of the Russian army.
So yes, they had strict criteria
Hmm.
around, obviously they didn't want FSB agents and military, so yeah, so they actually did filter and qualify beyond you know you know
Yeah.
being an AIN.
So another one of the big stories that came out of the Olympics was the harassment towards Algerian boxer. Probably going to butcher her name, Imani Khalif. Um,
Oh, that's nice. The Mane Khalif, yes. Hmm.
there were accusations around her gender. A lot of people were saying like, "Oh, she's not a woman; she shouldn't be able to compete," And there was a lot of online harassment for this girl.
Hmm.
She actually filed a complaint over the online harassment in Paris. I'm curious, will anything come of this? Because the internet is one of those things that's it's not new, but it's becoming more highly regulated.
Sure. I don't know necessarily that Amane filed the complaint. I think she had
Hmm.
support, from the French government, obviously, and others. But yeah, but willing to be a party to it, absolutely.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, the situation around Amane, is a hot potato, right? So
Hmm.
given, especially the highly polarized political environment here, right, already,
Hmm.
and some of the people named in the complaint, while it was filed against X, formerly Twitter,
Right.
named high level people like Elon Musk, who also put out inflammatory
Yeah.
and harassing content on the platform. And in fact, as I understand the complaint, what they're after is for the X to help them, you know, unmask a lot of these anonymous accounts and see who they are. And
Right.
if you start looking at all the accounts, you've got J.K. Rowling, you have
Right.
Donald Trump, a lot of people they're
Hmm.
piling on this abuse, right? And so that's where this is leading,
Hmm.
and you know where it will go from here. My guess is it'll be public shaming. It'll be a lot of court fighting.
Yeah.
Nobody. I don't think anyone at those levels are going to end up in jail. They may end up with some restrictions about entering France for a while. So
Yeah.
maybe, but I think it is important. And you have an athlete, and while I have my own personal opinions around this, I have to step back and say the IOC went through an adjudication process
Hmm.
and found her eligible to compete, and she competed and she won, and that is the line of the law. Right now,
Hmm.
if you don't like it, you go back and you work with the IOC and you plead your case and get them to change the criteria and those kinds of things down the road. But there's no excuse for the vile harassment of an individual, for whatever
Yeah.
their lineage. So that's really where I come at this. That
Hmm.
it's really a shame that our public discourse and our politics has become so
Nasty.
nasty. Yeah.
Yeah. So, going to throw it back all the way to one of our first episodes
Okay. Okay.
about returning stolen or looted
Oh yeah.
artifacts to the country of origin.
Hmm.
So the US is planning to return 297 artifacts to India and sign an agreement that should streamline the process in the future, making it easier for other countries to get their
Hmm.
artifacts back. Is this a continuing trend of returning these objects, or is it some kind of political gain to be had here?
Okay, so there's always political gain.
Could have guessed.
um, okay, so this is ongoing. In the 70s, UNESCO, which is
Hmm.
charged by the UN to preserve, antiquities and cultural sites and those kinds of things, had a convention on prohibiting stealing things and that kind of, and trading them and that kind of stuff. So this is not new.
Hmm.
The It was called the I don't know, cultural property return agreement or something like that. Anyways, what they signed here in the U.S. But the reality is, the U.S. under UNESCO has been repatriating, right, these
Hmm.
objects to India for a long time. So timing this agreement with Biden when Modi was here for the Quad meeting and
Right.
having, so yes, there's there's
Great
always
photo op.
political gain. Now, having been saying that a little bit, uh, okay, great. They did this. Clearly, they streamlined the UNESCO, which was huge, and so probably streamline the processes and how it maps into the U.S. government
Hmm.
and who has responsibilities and authorities and all of that kind of stuff. So it wasn't totally political, and I think, and hopefully, maybe a model for other nations. I think
Yeah.
when I looked at this over the weekend, I don't know, 150, let's say, states are signatories to the UNESCO agreement as far as trading in cultural artifacts and getting
Okay.
transferring them and that kind of stuff. So there's already a huge number of countries, and so maybe this agreement that we develop may help them as a
Hmm.
model, be more effective within their states and in doing the same. But
Yeah.
so. Mhm.
Very cool, though.
It is you look at it and it's just like the Native American Indians and things where they're trying to get their burial grounds and their
Hmm.
artifacts returned. It in your heart it says, okay, these are rightfully theirs, right? They were stolen or pilfered or whatever, right?
Hmm.
And but at the same time, you think about these institutions, the museums and heritage sites that have housed these, that have to give up these artifacts, right? So it becomes much more difficult for people to go into the American Indian Museum in Washington D.C., and then it's not so interesting, right? If all the interesting things have been returned. So what I have seen out there is a lot more now of like high resolution 3D imaging and virtual reality and other technologies that are being brought to bear, that they can image all of these artifacts and create a very lifelike engagement of people with these artifacts without physically having them present. And so I think we do have an opportunity with technology to create these experiences in the museums, even though we can't touch them anyway, but to look at.
So, one of the ways that we find stories to discuss on the podcast is through X,
Oh
formerly
yeah,
known
good
as
old
Twitter.
X.
However, it's no longer an option for a lot of people living in Brazil. The
Oh yeah.
state, like, they banned countrywide X. I mean, not
Hmm.
that it's a real loss, but to some there might be. What happened?
So all of this is really straightforward. In the lead up in Brazil to their 2023, during their elections, they had a attack on their Congress, very similar to our situation that we had in the United States in 2020. And election misinformation was circulated on a variety of social media platforms, and people were using the social media to help plan the attack, quote unquote. And so after that, Justice Morris ordered several of these platforms, including Twitter, to block specific accounts, right? That had been involved in the planning and also propagating misinformation and those kinds of things, and basically said, "I'm going to fine you guys if you don't comply," right? And then the good old Elon Musk, has to enter the fray, and he said that he would defy the ruling, and also suggested that users could get around any block that the Brazilian government might do through using, VPNs, virtual private network tools, right? So they, looked at this, and obviously that escalated the battle, right? And he basically said if X did not comply with their orders, that they would be shut down. So that's what happened, right?
Yeah. So, like you said, the VPNs, of course, give you that workaround, but the
Hmm.
span might actually just be temporary. Um, they are, like you said, Elon Musk kind of chimed in and is now complying with the orders from Brazil. As it
Um,
returns,
yeah, go ahead. Mhm.
oh, do you think there's going to be any change in the operations of it?
When you said that, so X, Elon's company, did file paperwork and attest themselves that they're complying,
Mm-hmm.
and has and requested that the ban be removed, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of, I think, where things are, right now. And like I said before, this is a major market for X. This is probably one of their top markets outside of the U.S. So it's, as I would say, he blinked as far as this goes, and working through the resolution. And um, yeah, like you said, it's either, it may have been, since I haven't looked in the last 3 or 4 days, but it'll definitely, I would say, highly likely it'll get resolved, and X will be back online in Brazil.
Mm-hmm. So it's actually not
Yeah.
unique for a country to ban a specific social media site. Facebook and Instagram are banned in
Mm-hmm.
China. US, we're planning to ban TikTok. Does this
Mm-hmm.
ban in Brazil kind of create the conversations more in depth for the ban in the US? Like, is it something about these social media sites that people are just like, no, we don't want these in our country? Do you see more country specific bans on these networks?
I would say in authoritarian countries,
Yeah.
if they aren't already, either banned or strictly controlled. I think really the issue is that countries are looking at real studies that have shown the impact to society around these social networks, and how they're literally designed to amplify things that activate or trigger or get people's attention. And a lot of times this is misinformation, it's conspiracy theories, it's things that are not, either not true, or being elevated in front of, like, for example, the youth audience. So all of that's going on, where they're saying, look, these need to be regulated more, and need to be held more accountable for how they propagate through their algorithms content to end user communities, right? Cohorts. And so I'm very supportive of that, because a lot of this is artificial. It's not just human discourse where I have three or four hundred people, like, that's my little community, and we chit chat on Twitter, and that's
Hmm.
that. That's what they're bringing content in from millions of other people into our community, and influencing the discourse, right? And so they are doing that, and I think they should be held accountable for what they're pushing into your essentially local social network.
Okay. Devil's advocate here.
Hmm.
There is a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and, AI generated things, but there's also access to things happening around the world that are actually true and real. Do you
Hmm.
think that this is possibly just another tool that these authoritarian governments use to control what is being pushed in, not just the bad?
Yeah, well, yeah. So authoritarian, China, is like probably the premier controller of social media, and with the great, Chinese wall, and so yeah, I mean, yeah. So it's like if I'm interested in global news, right? Then okay, let me go look at that, and let's have news coming from what we call provenance of that content to known producers of content, whether it's an individual or not, right? And
Mm-hmm.
there's a couple of initiatives out there, the content um, authority initiative and the C2PA, which is a similar kind of thing, where people that are generating content, whether it's you or whether it's the New York Times or the BBC, this content is going to be signed and proof that it came from you. So no anonymous crap that's just being floated around or created by Russian bots or whatever, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that those kinds of initiatives will help tamp a lot of this down, where you're not going to just and people are not going to be so inflammatory if they're not anonymous, right? And they
Yeah.
can just say whatever they want. So I think there are a lot of things going on to tamp down the what's happening out there in the social media, universe. Right?
Yeah, I love the irony that Facebook and Instagram are banned in China, but TikTok is a Chinese based site. Um, Well, a lot of these bans are taking place. There, like you mentioned earlier, are a bunch of workarounds with these VPNs or virtual private networks.
Hmm.
Are we about to see an upsurge in the use of these programs, or do you think it's too technologically advanced for most people?
Yes and no. So,
Okay.
um, I mean, setting up a VPN and using it is very straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not anything that's like, whoa, I have to be a super techie to do that. And, I use it regularly when I'm doing research on the internet, right? Why? One, it encrypts my traffic, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
can't, what I'm doing and what picking up is private to me. And then the other thing that it does is it obfuscates my address. So it's like on the social media, I can go in there and be an anonymous person and say and do anything, right? Well,
Mm-hmm.
when I'm on the net, my computer address, once it goes to your internet service provider and then out on the network, you
They
can be
all know who you
tracked, and
are.
so
Yeah.
it's really a privacy issue, right? And if you
Mm-hmm.
use a VPN, even your ISP, your service provider, can't kind of track and create a history of your browser searches and all those kinds of things. So it
Right.
really is a privacy protection
Mm-hmm.
tool, and for that reason, why people are using it in China and Brazil, to get around them, banning, because they don't necessarily know where that traffic's coming from, right?
Right.
So no, I would say, um, yeah, I think it is useful for people for their online privacy. Absolutely.
I just don't see
Now
me
the challenge
being
is the vast majority of VPNs are basically you can link them back to Chinese owned companies.
right.
And who holds the keys to the encryption and all the other technology, so that which is the whole TikTok and
Mm-hmm.
why certain VPNs are banned and that kind of stuff. So it's not, nothing is ever easy, like, oh, just go pick you know the number one
Mm-hmm.
VPN and throw it on your computer. So you need to do a little bit of research to make sure that it's a reputable and clean
Right.
provider.
So the next story, we're going back to season one again. Artificial intelligence, more specifically, how
Right.
powering all of these new technologies is going to affect us. Microsoft signed a deal to purchase power from Three Mile Island nuclear plant,
Hmm.
and it looks like it's going to reopen in a few years. Is that what it's going to take to power Chat GPT? I always mess up Chat GPT. Is that what's going to happen with them reopening a nuclear power plant?
That's what expedient
Hmm.
way to get voracious amounts of power quickly. Yeah, the U.S. electrical grid and globally are under incredible stress
Yeah,
trying to
another
feed the
season one
power
topic.
requirements, right? And as
Hmm.
these local large language models get bigger and more sophisticated, and more people are using it, it really counters the whole greenhouse gas emissions and meeting climate requirements and those kinds of things. So the companies that are requiring this power want to have clean, carbon neutral power,
Right,
and they need it in huge amounts, right? And right now the only technology that can do that is nuclear. And so
right.
okay, so then if you're going to do nuclear, what they're looking at, and you'll see out in the news where these small nuclear reactors, right, are and they have to, but they still have to get them licensed and all those things. So
Okay.
that takes a long time. And you go here and look at a plant that was previously certified,
Hmm.
that the underlying what's going on at 3 Mile, that was human error. This was not technology error, right?
Hmm.
And so they can go and say, okay, we're going to leave that old reactor, but we're going to go over here and refire up the others. It's not like scary, like, oh no, now they're going to start up a reactor that was failed and could have killed millions of people. Anyway, so getting that recertified and online is a quicker path to success
Hmm.
than building new or trying to get SMRs, small nuclear SNRs, deployed. So yeah.
What about investing in solar energy? Why aren't these companies just building solar plants?
So they are we have had tremendous growth in solar power production
Hmm.
on the grids in the United States. But everyone knows there's no solar when it's dark, rainy, and
Yeah.
so the companion to solar, which is lacking, is large scale, efficient, cost effective energy storage.
Okay.
So if I can have tremendous solar generation and I can actually store it for a sufficient period of time to cover these clearly overnight, but also for multi-day weather issues,
Hmm.
then solar as a package, solar and storage will become more viable. And there is tremendous technology advancement around batteries and energy storage, and not necessarily batteries. Some are doing it kinetically, just pumping
Hmm.
water and then flowing water, just like good old hydroelectric power. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, the other one, interesting one just to throw in is actually it's being explored is to move data centers to space.
Hmm.
Okay, so I have infinite cold sink, right, for heat. I
Hmm.
can point at my solar panels at the sun. I don't have clouds and weather and darkness.
Hmm.
And I have these now networks of satellites where I can beam data back and forth from the data center. And
Yeah.
so that's a an architecture that's being evaluated, and potentially would answer a lot of these problems.
Interesting. Um, so just going to move on from
Hmm.
that. We're not going to be going into detail to it too much this week, but there was that major shakeup in the presidential race here.
Hmm.
President Joe Biden, he decided to step aside. A lot of factors went into his decision, but
Hmm.
looking at this historically, has anything like that ever happened before?
Like that. So I'd say like that, yes. That close to the election, no.
Yeah.
So the kind of the last president that kind of said, I'm getting too much pressure, I'm out, was Lyndon Johnson, right around the
Hmm.
Vietnam War. So that was the 60s, I guess. Um, but there I guess so when he did that was March, so 8 months prior to the election, right?
Hmm.
So similar, right? But we also had other presidents. Truman also was well into the cycle before he pulled out. That was in the 1950s. And a bunch of presidents in our history that were president and chose not to
Run
run,
again.
right?
Hmm.
So at all, right? So yeah, so that whole concept of a sitting president either not running or pulling out early is not unique to Biden, but the timing is absolutely unique.
Yeah. Do you think that
So
it was, do you think that he felt forced or pressured into that decision?
100%.
Hmm.
I mean, that's like Biden. No, I mean, his whole life and his whole persona is wrapped up in his public service, and I think he truly felt that he could gut it out for another 4 years and be productive and deliver for the American people. I think he truly believed that, and I think it took a chorus of people, including his family,
Hmm.
to and the facts on the ground as far as where
Yeah.
he stood in the polls and those kinds of things. I mean, just all that came to crescendo,
Hmm.
and he pulled out. But obviously, it took longer than people would have liked. Therefore,
Yeah.
it became unique in history, right? So,
Yeah.
but there are other historical tidbits that when I talk to people, we have American history in schools, but it seems like people don't recall much, right?
Yeah.
Because I was talking. This was at a presentation I was doing a couple weeks ago in New York City around assassinations and attempted assassinations of presidents in the United States, and people can quickly recall Lincoln and Kennedy,
Hmm.
but then that's it. And it's like, well, actually, there's two other presidents that were assassinated, right? Garfield and McKinley, and then when the whole Donald Trump and his dual assassination attempts, and it's like, okay, but did you know that Gerald Ford had two assassination
Yeah.
attempts against him? And so again, this whole discourse and information and not people just don't necessarily know or remember the context of these kinds of histories that we have, right? So it's why people can be kind of easily manipulated, right? And they could be told, well, Donald Trump is the first president to ever have two to be successfully survive two assassination attempts, right? And it's
Yeah.
like,
No.
no, that's not true. But the vast majority of Americans, regardless of their political view, would say, okay, well, that's probably true, right?
Yeah. Quick Google search will fix that problem.
Yeah, but that's not what people do. They just listen to what's going on, and what
Very true.
resonates and what doesn't, they push on. So
Yeah, when I
yeah.
was in high school, my AP US history class, we had to do almost like book reports on the presidents each week.
Hmm.
And it was a way to learn about them. But I mean, even now, like the internet is there. A lot of these things can be, refuted. But like you said, people don't want to do that.
Yeah, at some point they're working on, again with AI and stuff, to have like a little bit of a side. If I'm reading an article, regardless of its source, that you have like a
Hmm.
misinformation bot that says,
Yeah.
oh, actually, that's out of context. Here's the context, or that's
Hmm.
actually factually not correct, and here's why, and here's references, right? So you have this like side by side fact checker that's
Yeah.
helping you, when you're picking up something and looking at it. So I think we'll see more of that. And again, this
Hmm.
content providence, this authority initiative where when a video or a piece of content is presented to you, you can tell, and it will say, that this is validated and the source is X, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, if I get a video and there's no providence or no, I can't be sure where it came from, then I can
Hmm.
choose to ignore it, right?
Yeah.
Unless it's funny,
Always the funny.
right?
Well, Bruce, as always, thank you so much for joining me today. It's good to see your face after so long.
Yeah.
And of course, thank you all so much for tuning in and welcome back. Please visit the World Trade Center Institute online at WTCI.org for more insights, events, and opportunities. And make sure you follow us on all social channels at WTC Institute. We'll see you next time.